Welcome back to the Restaurant Growth Show podcast. Today we have the privilege of hosting a true luminary in the food service industry, Mr. Jay Ashton, recognized as Canada's top food service influencer. Jay is a go-to resource for industry insights, making him a leading voice in food service. Jay, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. I think it was what you're supposed to say, right? I think that's the default. I would say just like we're on CBC.
Yes. Jose and you go back a little bit, back to the modern online ordering days. Jose, what kind of history?
It was like Jose was on his couch in his underwear.
That's right.
That was like the first time we met, right? Do you remember?
It tends to happen, yes.
Okay, I need to hear a little bit more about this interaction.
I was here. He was on his couch. I remember talking about the whole, it was just when you guys were just starting to get going.
It was in the beginning of the pandemic. I remember.
All in our couches on our underwear.
Exactly. No, and I had a really good setting with leather couch and all of that. Really good.
Yeah, I remember that. It was great. That's a long time ago. But is it almost like 3 years ago? Because that was just at the beginning. You guys contacted me right at the beginning.
I think it was in the beginning. It was through, I think someone in BC contacted, and we solved a whole bunch of restaurants issues, and then connected us so that we could become part of the advantage and actually help more restaurants.
Yeah.
Interesting times for sure.
2020.
Interesting pantless times. I'm sure we don't all miss very much, but one of the perks of working from home.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Jay, listen, dynamic pricing is all the buzz in hospitality lately. I'm not sure if you've heard about the Stonegate pub's recent rollout in the UK. There seems to be some pushback from in-house guests. What's your take on the whole dynamic pricing thing?
Actually, quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's where we're headed, and it's going to take time to adopt to that model. So I do see some of this pushback, and we will have that here in Canada. We'll have it in the United States as well. But it's a change. I'm sure there was some changes back in the day when airlines had to adjust their pricing based on times and flights and all these different things. There was always pushback there, and there is even today. I think you'll see the same thing in the industry. It'll take time. I believe we have to go to this model. I think it's important from a profitability. Also, environmental issues that are dealing with right now, we need to adjust not only pricing based on product availability. There's a lot more to it than just to gain profitability for the restaurant, which is a bonus. But I think it's going to have to be a very key component as you move forward, as long as it's a give and take model. It's not just always take, it's a give and take model where we are also looking at reducing pricing in some cases. It's not just a clever way of always increasing, but a way to also decrease to drive foot traffic in time periods when we need to drive foot traffic in restaurants. So I really believe it's the way we have to go. I believe it will be the way that we just got to get used to. When you look at the percentages of what restaurants make, it wouldn't hurt to make a few more percentages, and by using this method. And I think it's going to, in a way, save a lot of restaurants, because it could be, that's how fine I think a lot of restaurants are living on right now. That fine line is if they're making an extra few percentages based on using this model and this method. I think it'll be critical for a lot of restaurants to survive. So I'm a big fan. I believe it's the way to go. It'll just take some time to adopt. No different than how a lot of people are starting to adopt to AI as well, right? So it's just taking time, and that's normal when these are such dramatic shifts in culture and in traditional methods for hundreds of years. It's funny because I did some research on the weekend with Remembrance Day on Saturday, and I wrote an article also on what was happening in the restaurant industry around that 1940s, 1945, even up to the edge of 50. And there was a lot of similar things happening today. Obviously, war was, a little different in the war aspect. It was a world war, not different regional wars that are happening today, but it was affecting a lot of the supply and demand of products. The government came in and capped pricing on menus. I don't know if you guys know that. The government said, no, you cannot increase menus. There was organizations also created to monitor menus. Restaurants were really geared to do a lot of things in a sense that was controlled. Like, they weren't out there being able to do almost like what they wanted to, but they had a lot of controls in place. But there was dynamic pricing almost in those days of what they were adjusting based on their availability, based on products that they can only get their hands on because of the war affecting it but like did you believe that they had meatless Monday meatless Monday or Tuesday? I think it was meatless Monday or Tuesday.
Well, Tuesdays are for tacos, so I imagine.
I was gonna say I don't think Taco Tuesday was around then either, but meatless Mondays. And you think about that, like we look at it today, we're like, oh, we'll do meatless Mondays, and it was done back in the 40s, right? So I think we have to also review history and look at those adjustments and what we did back then as how we're adjusting and working with dynamic pricing.
That's interesting. I remember a show that you do, I think at least yearly, where you bring this friend of yours that it's like a new optimizer, and then you give tips on what the cost is, how long it takes, and at the end, it's like, this is very important to do for your menu at least once a year. Right?
Oh, that's what's nice about this is that you have to look, like the ability to look at menus today has to be done every day.
Exactly.
Right? Like it has to be. It's the way the world is. Because if you're like, here's the thing when I think about menus in the print days, you would run a menu, like you said, Jose, for like a year, or you run it for a quarter. Well, the fluctuation, because most products that are governed, like are for restaurants, a lot of them are fluctuating on market pricing, right? So if you look at produce, right, produce is tremendous. And as we shift a lot of menus with a heavier focus on produce, healthier lifestyles, then we say like pastas or, well, even proteins are on a market-based pricing. So you look at those fluctuations on those things that are going 99% of the time, it's up. And you're taking that on the you're taking a lot of those cost increases because you're concreted into a menu that you printed, and then you're losing percentages. Half a percentage means a lot of money instantly after you print. You could be out of price 3 days later. And I think it's important to look at that as we move forward because of those pricing fluctuations. And the impact on pricing fluctuations today are almost happening every week based on natural disasters, based on wars, based on all these huge factors that we don't have control on. It could be a landslide in BC that causes a problem. It could be a flood somewhere, right? There's so many that we didn't have before. It was typically like an outbreak that prevented us from product availability or bad weather. Well, that was like once, every 5 years you'd have a bad weather storm in California or in Mexico that affect pricing, or oranges in Florida. It affects the orange, all these different things. Well, now it's like every month there's a natural disaster somewhere that's affecting supply of our foods. So I think it's important that we look at menus daily because every half a penny counts today. Half pennies.
I know. And there is like a behavioral change in the consumer that has to happen, just like we adapted to the hotels and airlines, where I was having a conversation with a friend and he was like, well, I don't want those prices to change. I know the prices of my items. And I'm like, and you want them yearly? Like, do you know how many times inflation, all these different factors are changing all the time? And you as a consumer want the restaurant to just keep it like that for a full year, when by the next year you've already eaten all of the margin because something happened. So if a restaurant is not able to optimize their menu on a monthly basis minimum, like you were saying, it's just an accelerating thing. So the faster they're able to adapt, the easier it's going to be for you as a consumer to not feel it because you're watching for it. So if it's a gradual change that helps the restaurant to maintain that optimization, they're able to give you better discount and with confidence, with tracking possibility, right? So
I also think when you look at it's almost like that strategy back in the day when we used to do menus, you used to say don't use 0.99, like don't do 99 cents. Well, I was taught that. I said, yeah, but it doesn't do the purpose of what you're doing. And then you always have to do a dollar bump, right? Like it's hard to adjust your menu. So I used to do really odd equation numbers. So it actually made people almost uncomfortable to look at that number, that they focused more on the attention of the description of the product, right? So it wasn't always like, because it's $12.99, it almost rolls off your tongue very easy, other than $12.26, right? Like it's in your head, you're playing with this. So you tend to veer away from the pricing you view.
Right.
Use focus product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Jay. I think the 99 marketing tactic, I think, is a little bit old, and I think generally the public has gotten hip to that. Like, oh, you're just trying to make it look like this is less than what it is. But I like your approach where you've got some odd numbers there instead of
It's hard to say.
Trying to pull the wool, right?
I think it's IKEA that does that. They do the same kind of strategy. Look at it as well, right? Like you just same kind of thing. So every penny counts. It was Harvard Business School that did a really good report review of the way that we look at menus, back in the day, and this whole psychology behind it. And there's books out there. I've read some books on them as well, but it is really interesting when we look at just the adoption. It just takes time. It just takes time, but it will come. And I always say this, and I always say this on my show, and I'll ask you both. What's the price of a medium Coke at McDonald's?
Oh boy. I know Jose will know the answer to this.
Jose, do you know?
Of the medium, it's 125. No, I don't know.
You don't know. You don't know. No
I'm
one
not
knows.
sure. I'm not sure.
No
I
one
don't even think. I think this might be the point. I don't even think about what that costs.
Exactly.
Because you don't know. No
Yeah.
one knows. It's there, but no one knows.
Yeah.
Just automatically want it. Yeah, in my order. Sure.
But you don't know what it is. And think about like McDonald's, how many Cokes that they go through, but they can fluctuate 3 cents up on that Coke price during peak hours, you know, or during the holiday season right now. Boom. I just did an article this morning. Actually, I posted an article. McDonald's is launching their Crocs right now. Well, why are they launching iconic, bright, colorful Crocs right now? Well, it gets your attention off any menu prices that they have increased now, right? Cross-marketing strategies, right? What a great way is bring in Crocs that the generation that wears Crocs and thinks they're cool are the ones that are cautious about their price points on their menu. So bring in something to divert people towards that opposed to looking at the prices of the products, because their R&D, QS R&D is so low right now. Obviously, you can tell all the QSRs in the marketplace right now really took a lighter, approach on their development right now on their menus. So you're not seeing very, very simple, not complex LTOs out in the market now. And you see that a lot of restaurants are using pickles. I won't name who they are, but a lot of restaurants are even using pickles in their LTO items because pickles don't fluctuate in price. Produce does.
And that's the thing, right? I remember this in your shows about menu optimization, that it was like you don't necessarily want to change it on the steak that you're feeling the pinch, because actually if you look at the margins and the volume, you could, by doing the like McDonald's on the pop that nobody pays attention to. So you're compensating.
No one pays attention. Like last time you sat down in a restaurant and said, I'll have a Coke. Oh, wait a minute. What's the price?
Yeah, exactly.
No one does that. No one does that. No one does that. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Jay, I want to sort of revert back a little bit back to when you were talking about updating print menus and how it strikes me as restrictive. If restaurants need to change their prices on a day-to-day basis, weekly or monthly at minimum, do they need to print new menus every single day?
Well, it depends. It's funny, back in the war, just so you know, that actually most menus that they were printing actually went, I think, into more like that newsprint model, like very inexpensive print materials, because they couldn't afford to have their menus, and they flipped them. Because back in the 30s and 20s is very French style, like very elegant menus. They were, detailed, would have been extremely expensive. And through the war, everything was pulled back. So they actually went to a cheaper print material and very, inexpensive in a sense. I think if you are going to a print model, which is elegant, very nice, I think I read today about just really focus on the simplicity of it. It doesn't need to. I would really, think twice about going and printing professionally. I think today there's a lot of ability to look at the cost of that. If it is, I hope there's not too many restaurants left with large menus. They're going to more of that simplistic menu model. I would stick to very, very small, print as less as you can. If you can, move to a digital format, QR code, phone, iPad, all the methods that are out there. I think we're close to having display on the tables, display imagery onto tables for menus. I think that's right around the corner. I've seen some of that already. I think we're getting there, but I think when you get into print and you go to an old style model of print, like the restaurants, like mine was, and we printed on vellum, like we had a really cool menu, but every time we had to do a menu, it was $3,000 or $4,000.
Yeah,
that was in 2001. So I can only imagine what the costs are today. And because printing also doesn't go down in price typically. And I would just be cautious. It would just be very cautious if you're going into a print model. It's still nice. Don't get me wrong, it's still nice, but it is very expensive. It is very, very expensive to be printing menus all the time. So I think digital is the way. iPad models, I've seen that for years. I think that's still there. But the ability to even use VR, I've done some VR menus where you're using your phone to, look at the table. Like we did a menu. This is like way back when VR came into the world. We were doing just menu recognition of the app. So you have the app, you just put the phone towards the menu, it would recognize the menu, it would open it up on your phone, and then even the chef would come out of the table and talk about today's pricing, right? So there's a lot of dynamics in that space, but I would just be cautious because that sounds expensive, but print is ridiculously expensive nowadays.
Yeah,
so it looks good, but
there's the waste, the paper that you didn't use. And
I think you're on to that, Jose, is that I think there's other ways to look at it, right? Like, because sustainability, even in that manner, may seem simplistic, but a lot of people will look at that, even if it's recycled paper or whatever the case is, they'll look at that as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, how do you think dynamic pricing strategies can be balanced with maintaining a positive customer experience, especially in an industry where services quality is paramount?
I think it's education, education, education. Anytime that we make significant changes within a restaurant and we say that we have to without explaining it, becomes problematic. We have to do this to survive. Problematic. If restaurant people knew that you made 4 cents on each dollar or 5 cents, maybe you're making a little bit more, making a little bit less. If they understood what your profit return was on each dollar, they may think twice about it. So I think the more that we can educate the general public, but it's funny you say that, Jose. I was thinking the other day of creating a menu and showing the profit return on average per item on the menu beside the price.
That's interesting.
Talk about
Right, so
transparency.
here's what we make off this item. Because
Yeah.
we did this, me and my daughter, we dined out a couple of weeks ago in Calgary. And I said, it was this beautiful dinner and everything else. And I said, at the end of it, I said, he made $4. And it was three of us. And it was a funky place. It was incredible. Beautiful food, everything. And she's like, what? Yeah, he made $4. He took home $4. After everything's paid, everything else, he made $4 in that hour. He's got lots of tape, but add it up, right? So
Yeah.
when you look at that, as long as I think the more that we can educate in a very, I don't think it has to be very defensive. It has to be very positive. Just letting everyone know what we truly make, because the industry it will take time to adjust, I guess, the prices for people to really understand what we truly make. The public will take time for them to understand that, but accept it, right? It's like I was looking at the groceries yesterday, and we're almost on the tipping part right now. I would say we're bridging the tipping part where we're starting to accept the prices at a grocery.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think just about there. I think we're give it a few more months of this crazy prices, and then we'll start to see. You know how you can tell is the deals are starting to move. Like, you can see that, and you can see people not focusing on the standard, but they're venturing off and trying different things. You can typically see that. But I could see yesterday, I was like, okay, we're almost accepting. We're almost there.
Right. Right. And I think that one concept that was really interesting to me that I had not considered is that the perception of the gap between the grocery basket for home and why do restaurants numbers don't change, right? Like the consumer depends on or counts on the restaurant keeping that price that at some point will be eating their margins at the end of a year if they don't change it, and that flexibility. But I think that it's like a question in the back of everybody's mind. It's like, well, my grocery keeps changing, but if I go to the restaurant, it's gonna have the same price as the year, right?
Yeah.
And what we as consumers don't consider is that, well, probably restaurants are chopping more and more from their margins as they keep those prices there.
But I think, Jose, those prices were like that when we walked into menus. When menus really became a part of the, I guess, let me rephrase this. I think started looking at menus probably through the 60s, definitely the 70s, is when we started really realizing the power of what the menu can do. That's when menu engineering really took shape, was in the 70s, right? So we started understanding, like eye movement, plow, the cows and horses and everything else formats, we started understanding through the 70s is really when we understand the power of the menu. So I think when you look at that, we haven't adjusted to really start to understand like what the menu will do for us if we don't allow the restaurants to have some adjustment on pricing. Really get from one to really just make more money because they have to, but also just to really create an experience for the guests that they haven't had before, right? And I think we're on the edge here. I think this will bring some of that into the marketplace more. But I think we're on an adjustment time through these evolution of what menus. But I think when you look at the pricing, 70s, it got stuck. And then we couldn't adjust the menus. We only redid. We probably back in those days, people didn't adjust their menus for 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
Through the 80s, it was every 5 years, right? And then franchises came in the late part of the 80s and said, no, we're going to do seasonal menu. I'm going to research who figured that out. But seasonal menus through the back end of the 80s, right? And that was more through the franchise models. Restaurants were starting to introduce that because it was easier for us to buy products for that season. They understood that model. I think restaurants are also doing that because through the 40s, they called them victory gardens. Victory gardens were they encouraged here's another thing. Back in the 40s, the government was encouraging restaurants to have their own garden. Go figure that out. They're called victory gardens.
Yeah, that's coming back for sure.
Isn't that hilarious?
That's
so
wild.
we're back to that, right?
Yeah,
My point is on the pricing points. I don't think we started getting into I think we're starting to lose that focus on the price point so much, as long as it's reasonable. But we don't have regulars like we did, that those prices, when you adjusted those prices in the 80s and 90s, the regulars would always came in for that steak sandwich, knew the price on that steak sandwich. So when you moved it a nickel, they lost it and they wouldn't come back. They felt like they were betrayed almost. So I think when we look at the menu pricing today, that generation's gone. Like, how many times do you go back to the same restaurant and have the same meal? Maybe once or twice a year outside of a QSR model, right? That in the QSRs have already got you figured out on the dynamic pricing, but on the regular, like, there's just too many options today. And then we're influenced by kids' decisions, and they're like, they never go to the same place, right? We're always changing it up. So I think it's that demand of how do you bring in new customers? How do you get them hooked on the products, the experiences, not so much on the pricing point. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, totally. I wanted to ask you, how can restaurants effectively communicate dynamic pricing, the changes to their customers to maintain transparency and trust? And I think that part of like the answer to that question is that what you were just saying, like, and I had not even considered this, is that tell the consumer what is it that you're making as a margin.
Yeah.
So it is
definitely is, yeah,
being
that's
real,
the out of the box. Yeah.
I think it's being real. Like, if I was running a restaurant again and I was introducing dynamic pricing, I would get on video instantly. So here's what we're doing. We're going to try this. And that means that offering you deals when you need to have deals.
Bingo.
Right? Getting on a video. You imagine if you got on there and said, this is what we're trying to do. We're going to try to do something. I don't know if you all know that I only make 4 cents on the dollar, but we're trying to make it so I can offer you lower dishes, right? Like and it's not always about pricing your products. We're going to also look at how do we also decrease products and price because the volume is there. Right. And that's when I used to engineer menus all the time, thousands of them. I always called it an art because it wasn't always about going up. Let's drive some attention over here. Let's introduce a new product. Let's drive the pricing low on this so we get some traffic on this item. Like, it's like playing the real estate game in a way is what you're doing. And I think as long as you're authentic, real, don't ever say something and don't do it, because you will lose that trust. And as soon as you lose your trust with your community and your customer base, you're done. Right. And I think that's where if you play it right, you could be completely transparent on what your purpose is here and be authentic at it, and you will win. You will win big time.
It would be like even a brand culture. That transparency will grab the hearts of your customers, right? Because especially if you're first, and oh my God, I love it. Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities there for sure.
Hey guys, looks like we are running a little bit short on time here. Let me just wrap up.
I was like, are we short on content? I keep going.
No, it's been fantastic.
As always.
Jay, it's clear that dynamic pricing is more than just a trend. It's a strategic pivot towards smarter, data-driven decision-making. Our conversation with Jay has illuminated the complexities and opportunities this approach offers. Remember, it's not just about adjusting prices. It's about enhancing the customer experience and driving your business forward in a competitive market. Jay, now's your time to plug away. How can restaurateurs connect with you? What's your platform of choice?
I'm on LinkedIn every few minutes, and then they can listen to the restaurant shows, our podcast. And then I'm also the voice of Restaurants Canada's podcast called Menu Unplugged. Those are my two podcasts, as well as I'm on LinkedIn. And then I'm on Instagram under Canada's Restaurant Guy. And then I also have a daily newsletter as well that comes out every day on over everything in the industry.
I haven't even joined that one. Which one's that?
Called Canada's Hospitality News. Yeah, I have so much stuff going on, I can't remember. But we did actually write just recently about menu engineering, and we did talk about dynamic pricing in that just recently. So, and then I also did one on the weekend about World War II and our industry during that time.
I definitely want to see that, because those patterns just right.
They do, eh? Well, they recycle.
Yeah,
it's everything is a cycle.
Meatless Mondays. I thought Meatless Mondays was the coolest idea.
No kidding.
In the 40s.
Well, speaking of plugs, this podcast is sponsored by Dynpricing, real-time restaurant profitability. Dynpricing uses artificial intelligence to improve restaurant profitability by dynamically updating menus across digital channels like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, Skip the Dishes. That is all the time we have for this episode. Thanks again to Jay Ashton for joining us. Please reach out to him across all the networks and all of the content that he is producing. Jay, thank you so much for joining us. Until next week, Say goodbye, Jose.
Goodbye, Jose.
Jay, thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Always
Thank you.
so insightful. I took 3 things that were new that we had not even considered that I think it's going to be really cool for a project.